Alyssa, hit the start webinar button at the top. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give people a minute or so to get into the webinar room, and then we will get started at the top of the hour. Okay, we still have a few people coming in, but we will get started. Again, welcome to our webinar today, Treatment and Recovery in African American Communities, a panel presentation featuring Hall of Fame recipients of the Museum of African American Addictions, Treatment and Recovery. Our facilitator today is Mark Sanders. This webinar is brought to you by the Great Lakes ATTC and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA under the following cooperative agreements. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. The ATTC network believes that language matters and uses the affirming language that inspires hope and advances recovery in all of our activities. Thank you again for joining us. We have some housekeeping details. If you are having technical issues, please individually message Jen Winslow or Alyssa Kuala in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and they'll be happy to help you. We will be using auto transcription during today's training. Certificates will be sent to all who attend the full session, and you will receive an email with a link to your certificate. Also, because we have a lot of people and chat tends to move very quickly, if you have any questions specifically for the panelists, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen so that we can make sure that the speakers are able to answer those questions. If you would like to see what else we're doing, please follow us on social media. And I am very excited to have our facilitator today be Mark Sanders. Mark is the state project manager for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC. He is also an international speaker, trainer, and consultant in the behavioral health field whose work has reached thousands throughout the United States, Europe, Canada, the Caribbean, and the British Isles. Mark is also the founder of the online Museum of African American Addictions, Treatment, and Recovery. He is the past president of the board for the Illinois chapter of NADAC, and Mark is also the 2021 recipient of the NADAC Enlightenment Award, recognizing his outstanding service through a lifetime of consistent contributions to the advancement of NADAC, the addictions profession, and its professionals. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Mark, so we can get started.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Jen, and good morning, everyone. I always like to begin with a story. I have a friend named Greg Risberg, and he told me that one day a man called him at midnight and woke him up and asked, "Are you the same Greg Risberg who taught fourth grade across the street from Robert Taylor Public Housing 30 years ago?" Greg said, "Yeah, that's me." He says, "I was a student in your fourth grade class. You were my teacher." He says, "I'm a decorated military man. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't wind up achieving the rank of a Colin Powell. I was just calling you to tell you that you really made a difference in my life." And Greg said, "What did I do?" He said, "Every Friday you would stop teaching and you would sit the entire class in a large circle and you would ask us to read the newspaper from cover to cover. And in reading the newspaper from cover to cover, what I learned was that there was more happening in the world than simply what was happening in public housing. So it made me curious about the world. I hear him graduated high school, joined the military. I ran around the world twice, he said. But you did something that was more special than that. One day you invited the entire fourth grade class to a special field trip. You invited the entire class to your house. You asked everybody to bring a bag lunch to your house. And I looked in my refrigerator that night and I saw that I had no food. And when I made it to your house with no food, you went in your refrigerator and you fixed me a sandwich. Is anyway, the reason I'm calling is because we still have a home in Chicago and I'll be coming home next month. And I wanted to invite you over to my house so I could fix you a sandwich. And it dawns on me that it took him 35 years to see the fruits of his labor. Those of you who work in addictions, mental health, substance use disorders, recovery, your job is like a farmer who plants seeds, who probably won't see the fruits of your labor in the season that you plant the seed. And sometimes it takes many seasons to see the fruits of your labor. So I know that you do your work based upon faith, the absence of things unseen. Most people that recover will not do so in front of your face. And every now and then a miracle happens. And I'd like to share a quick miracle. So last Friday, a substance use disorders counselor told me and a group of individuals that one day he got on the bus, the 79th Street bus on the south side of the city of Chicago. And there was a woman in the back row and said, "Hey, you don't speak anymore?" It was one of his former clients. And she said, "This little boy I'm with, remember when I lost custody because of my drug use? I got custody back." She introduced him to her son. Then someone else yelled, "Hey, you don't speak anymore?" It was another one of his former clients who had been in recovery for 5 years headed to work. Someone else said, "Hey, you don't speak anymore?" It's like a miracle. 3 of his clients. So this is my wife. We both are in recovery. So sometimes we're blessed with those miracles. But thank you for what you do. Those of you with us today, I know the world cannot compensate you enough for the work that you do, so welcome. So let us begin our panel presentation. All right, so I'm the founder, as Ann mentioned, of the Museum of African American Addictions Treatment and Recovery. The website link is below. Historian William White convinced me that we should make all of our work as public as possible. You can write articles in journals, but sometimes the only ones who have access to those journal articles are the 200 people that subscribe to the journal. And everyone else has to pay big money in order to read one journal article. So we have scholarly articles, counseling articles, podcasts. What I'm really proud of is we have about 15 webinars that talks about various aspects of counseling African Americans with substance use disorder, lots of music, stories of the month, recovery stories, books, so much is there. And again, thank you for joining us. What we'd like to find out from you, because we want to get used to your chatting with us, is you find your chat feature. Would you tell us what you do in the city that you're joining us from? We want to know who's with us. We'll ask you, either Ann or Jen or Alyssa to sort of share with us where people are from and what they do.
Okay, we're a therapist from Fort Wayne, Indiana, someone from Jacksonville, Florida, New York City, New Jersey, transitional housing in St. Paul, so another St. Paul, Michigan, a substance abuse calendar, Houston, Louisiana, Joplin, Missouri. It's going very fast, St. Paul, Fort Wayne, Minneapolis, Chicago, Virginia, Chicago, Chicago. So
Looks like from all over, right?
New Mexico.
Louisiana to New York City, right? Minneapolis,
Exactly.
Chicago. So the panel presentation today features 4 of the recipients of the Museum of African American Addiction Treatment and Recovery Hall of Fame. In order to be nominated for the Hall of Fame, the candidates have had to have a national impact on substance use disorders, prevention, treatment, and/or recovery. So those of you with us today, if you'd like to make some nominations, you can go right to the museum website and make those nominations. And I am about to introduce our 4 panelists. I will read their biographical sketches one at a time. So first we have Jan Brown, Reverend Jan Brown. Reverend Jan Brown is founding executive director of Spirit Works, Foundation Center for the Soul. She has helped thousands of individuals and families impacted by substance use disorders. Jan is also a sought-after speaker nationally on the topic of recovery-oriented systems of care, recovery support services, and recovery management. Jan is the former chairperson of the board of directors of Faces and Voices of Recovery and co-chair of the Addictions Recovery Commission for the Diocese of Southern Virginia. In 2014, she was appointed by the governor of Virginia to serve on the governor's task force on prescription drug and heroin use. Welcome, Jan. Next, we have Michael Askew. Michael is the former director of recovery advocacy for Connecticut Community for Addictions Recovery, CCAR. He is currently a committee member for Black Faces and Black Voices through Favor. Recently retired, Michael has had a distinguished career as a leading advocate for individuals with substance use disorders in the criminal justice system and communities. His work has been widely recognized. He was a recipient of the 1996 Weed and Seed Community Leadership Recognition Award from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the year 2000 Unsung Heroes Award from SAMHSA, the Save Our Babies Award from the African American Historical Society of Fairfield County, the Joel Hernandez Award from Faces and Voices of Recovery. He was recently inducted into the Connecticut Hall of Change. Next, we have Dr. Mary Roberson. Dr. Mary Roberson is founder and executive director of Northern Illinois Recovery Community Organization, NIRCO. NIRCO's mission is to promote recovery for individuals, families, and entire communities impacted by substance use and mental illness. Dr. Roberson has had a 3-decade career in helping families facilitate recovery, specializing in working with women, adolescents, and returning citizens from the U.S. military. She speaks nationally on substance use disorders treatment for women, veterans, and African Americans. Dr. Roberson is author of Identity Development, Impact of Peer-Supported Recovery Among African American Women, and is a contributing author of the book, Substance Use Disorders in African American Communities, Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery. Dr. Roberson is a proud Navy veteran with deep roots in the veterans community. And then we have Roland Williams. For over 3 decades, Roland has worked worldwide as a counselor, interventionist, international lecturer, author, and consultant, specializing in substance use disorders treatment. In his role as an international consultant, Roland has helped develop world-class treatment facilities. He has provided consultation services and training in France, Italy, Switzerland, Holland, Thailand, the Philippines, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Argentina, Japan, the Dominican Republic, and the United Kingdom. Roland is director of the training for the Synapse Corporation, founded by the late Terrence Gorski. He is one of the most sought-after presenters in the nation. Roland has counseled numerous celebrities seeking recovery. For 25 years, he led relapse prevention support groups for healthcare, legal, and business professionals in the San Francisco Bay Area. Roland is also a specialist in culturally specific programming and authored the book, Relapse Prevention for African Americans. Would you join me in giving a virtual round of applause to all of the panelists? And I know, Roland, you were joining us at 10 this morning. Are you with us? Are you here, Roland?
He's not on yet, Mark. We'll let you know.
Okay, so he will join us when he comes in. So we will start with our 3 panelists, Jen, Michael, and Mary. So I have a series of questions to ask them. And if anyone has a question, you can put it in Q&A, and then we'll respond to that question right away. Perhaps some of the answers the panelists provide might create some questions for you. So let us begin. Panelists, what do you think is important for substance use disorders professionals to know about counseling African Americans with substance use disorders?
Any of us can just jump in and start?
Yes.
So I'm happy to get us started. I believe that all counselors and anyone working in the field, frankly, needs to know the history of African Americans. And there's a tremendous amount of information for me if you're going to serve or work with people who are in a different culture than you are, or even within the same culture that you are. I think knowing a bit about one's past, knowing a bit about the history of addiction treatment, addiction recovery support, the role of culture and family and those kinds of things are critical. Otherwise, you really can't provide service, I don't think, effectively. So I think that's the place to start.
Yeah, I'd like, go ahead, Jane. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I would say the importance of recognizing how kinship and spirituality or religion plays a part in African Americans as well. I think a lot of times that family system that may be kind of shattered is still important when you're talking about doing counseling with African Americans.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, it really takes the place of, like it's been shared, understanding the culture and being sensitive to it, but also understanding the trauma that came from oppression and over the years, even way back to slavery, where we always were looked at as second-class citizens. And now, more importantly, recognizing that there's a lot of mental health and other issues that people that come from underprivileged and marginalized communities have to deal with based on their substance use disorder. So there's a lot that goes along with that. So yeah, it really makes a difference.
Counselor who, thank you for your responses there. A counselor who was not African-American was counseling an African-American woman, and the client said, the Lord's going to take care of that for me. And the counselor wrote in her chart that she's not taking responsibility for her own life. What's your thoughts about that interaction?
Again, go ahead, Mike. Well, I'll surrender on.
Well, once again, here's the issue that, people play judgment on how people understand their commitment to their process in getting well. And so, I'm like Jan, I'm from a Baptist background. I'm a deacon. And so my faith is strong in the Lord. So, there's multiple pathways to recovery. So I just want people to understand that, whatever works for that individual, allow them to understand that process and also give them the space that they need to experience what they need to go through. There may be a time when they may have to change that pathway based on their inability to get to where they're at, but at least meet them where they're at and allow them to have that opportunity.
I became curious when I read about that, of the historical backdrop of the client making the statement, God will take care of this, where that comes from. The next question is, research indicates that African Americans seeking substance use disorder treatment, they seek treatment less frequently and have higher rates of non-completion than non-Hispanic whites with substance use disorder. So they seek help less frequently voluntarily and have higher rates of non-completion. How do you explain this and what can be done about it?
I'll take the lead on that. One of the things that I know in many years of counseling individuals and also supervising individuals that's in recovery is sometimes when African Americans are seeking treatment, if they're not seeing someone that, as they say, has walked in their shoes or represent them or look like them, sometimes that non-completion takes place. A big part of retention is to be, culturally sensitive and confident and having, individuals that look like the clients that come over, our doorstep. I think that that's a big part of it. And, we've been doing in the field, we've been doing a lot of good work throughout the years to, get more clinicians of color and, having people to represent the community that they serve in. I think that's a big piece of it.
Along those lines, I think some of the piece and I think Michael mentioned it earlier, is that, I mean, the historical trauma that we come with. I mean, a lot of those things are embedded in our culture and in our systems emotionally. I'd also suggest they're in our bones, and that's where a lot of the memories live. And so even when we do have people who look like us, you know, it's very helpful to have some of that sensitivity. I often use the word literacy. You know, I will never be fluent in anyone else's culture. I don't think I'll ever really be competent, but I can be literate. And I also can rely on the healers and you know, for me, recovery happens in community. So who are the indigenous healers, and who are the people that folks within a particular community look to? Because they may not look to me, but they certainly look to others. And so I need to be connecting with the folks who are in those communities, who others can look to.
Dan, you said it's in our bones where memories live. What do you mean by that?
I mean that until a lot of this is named and stated and really addressed, and I think that's one of the places where we have a lot of growth, right, to do, is there's a lot of anger that has been unexpressed and unresolved, and there's not a lot of safe places to do that. You know, I attend mutual recovery groups, others that I know, there's not a lot of place for people to talk about the day-to-day issues of racism. And so those kinds of traumas will continue to perpetuate because unresolved trauma, you know, has to live somewhere. And I believe that it lives in our bones, in the bones of our ancestors, that continues to move forward because it's not addressed.
With that living in our bones, what is the clinician, what is the counselor to do with that?
My belief
absolutely
is
correct.
certainly opening it up for others, but my belief is to give space for that to be talked about.
Okay.
The power, you started us off with stories. The power of stories is transformative, and I'll invite my colleagues in as well.
Yeah, I believe it's also an opportunity to learn more about the culture of individuals that have been oppressed and racially biased against. And so even in today's world, you know, you have a lot of social determinants that really play a role on how communities interact with law enforcement, you know, how, you know, if you look at the whole gamut of what we're experiencing now, imagine how that was 60 years ago. And so, you know, one of the things that I recognize is how valuable it is for a clinician to understand how the African-American community lives, how they learn, how their habits, their traits, their beliefs, the essence of how they live, and understanding that, you know, even the small things that, you know, still haunts us, whether we walk into a store and be followed, you know, and walk out very degraded, those terminologies that come with living a racial biased life in America follows us into treatment. It doesn't leave us. It's like Jan said, it's ingrained in our bodies and it's ingrained in our life. And so we have to live a different lifestyle based on how people, you know, look to us. So it all plays a role when a clinician doesn't understand where you came from. How do they understand how to get you where you want to go?
Can treatment itself be re-traumatizing to African Americans? And what would you recommend programs do to avoid re-traumatizing African American clients while they're in treatment?
Yeah, I think that treatment does re-traumatize us. You know, I'm so glad that nationally we have been talking for many, many years about language mattering. And the language that some treatment professionals use, like crack addicts or dope fiends, or, you know, language that's been that's been stigmatizing for many, many years. I think in those kind of settings, it really, really helps. You know, I think of instances when I was working in women's services and doing the cocaine epidemic before the heroin one, and all these women were giving birth the drug exposed infants, and we were trying to, help them to language that. They would say, well, my baby was born with cocaine in his system, like as if the baby had been using. And one of the things that I would instruct my treatment providers to do, or my counselors, no, talk to them about they had a drug exposed infant. Stop talking to them about they had a cocaine baby, or the baby was born with cocaine in their system. So yeah, I think that sometimes our treatment providers does re-traumatize individuals. The things that we could do is, again, to re-language that. I often talk in our RCO about, again, language really does matter. Don't be calling them, those are names that you're talking about. So that's what I think would be very, very significant.
Well, and for me, along with some of that stigma, is to actually get the history right. And Dr. Mary mentioned it just a minute ago. There was no more addiction or exposure rates for African Americans than there is for white Americans. And so some of the things that continue to perpetuate, this notion of men, African American men who use cocaine, and all of the things that are said about supernatural power and some of those kinds of things is frankly just wrong. And so, part of the stigma lives from those things. But until we start getting that history right, the stigma will forever be perpetuated. So just some understanding. I mean, babies aren't born addicted, they're born exposed. And yet, even today, we're hearing that kind of language. And I think the other piece that really stands out for me is around kinship. And who do I call family, right? We have enough problems with people involving and engaging family members historically with anyone's participate in treatment. Extend that a little bit forward in looking at who African Americans consider family, or who we consider our kinfolk.
So Ann or Jen, is there a question in the Q&A?
There is not yet, and I'm
Yeah,
happy
Ann.
Roland has been able to join us. So
Greetings, Roland.
just a quick reminder to people, if you have questions for the panelists, please do put them in the Q&A. You should say
Ann.
two in the Q&A. I'm not able to see that. So if either Keisha or someone else can see it, feel free to read them out. They don't show up in mine.
Yeah, I see a question. It says, let me see. Unfortunately, there are so few therapists of color. Any suggestions you have for those of us who are committed to being providing care for African Americans?
I think that, our education system, should continue to put a call out in the communities of color. A lot of times these social services or human services or counseling professions, people are so concerned about the money that's being made or not being made in our profession that a lot of times our young people don't want to get in this field. I think that, again, re-languaging that, if you get into counseling, you're never gonna, get six figures. I think that keeps a lot of people from coming in, as a therapist, as a counselor or a school counselor. I think that just changing that, again, I'm really stuck today on language for some reason, but changing the language on what we do in our academia settings, to get more counselors or therapists of color, I think would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, Mary, you have good company with Mark Twain. He said we should be careful by the words that we use. There's a big difference between lightning and a lightning bug. You're right that when we call those that we serve addicts, the prison population swelled. And then when we learned to use first person language, that changed everything. Roland, we read your biographical sketch. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I know that, Roland, you have started treatment centers all over the world. And so here's a question for you. If you were to develop a treatment center that specialized in culturally specific services for African Americans, what would you put in that program?
That's a good question. Well, I would certainly want the facility to look like it respects and values and celebrates African American culture. So it should look welcoming as soon as they walk in. I would like the clients to see people that look like them when they walk into the program, to see videos and educational materials that are targeted at that population and not some looking at a bunch of people that don't look like them, things that were made years and years ago. So current material that's being used. So all around the environment should reflect that this is a place that understands, gets, appreciates, and celebrates you as a culture. And then I would probably, take into consideration, so I would have stuff that deals with issues that are specific to African-American clients, things like, the history of oppression in this country, the current climate in the country, the way that all the things that have been happening over the past couple of years, more specifically, have had an impact on African-American clients seeking and utilizing treatment. I would talk about the relapse triggers that are specific to African-American clients. I would have curriculum in there that gave people opportunity to actually, and I do this in any program that I'm involved with, to have an opportunity for people to address cultural issues in treatment. That a lot of times the clients don't know how to talk about it. They don't feel safe talking about it. They feel like they don't want to be accused of playing the race card and all of that. We have to, we say that it's focus on the similarities rather than the differences, but we also got to recognize that the differences matter and be able to have some dialogue about that. And then the staff a lot of times don't feel competent, talking about it. And sometimes even Black staff, African-American staff, can be part of the problem because, we tend to talk down to each other. We tend to want to spend too much time trying to be cool and be hip and, instead of trying to encourage the client to rise up to another level. And, talk about the differences in recovery, what recovery means for African Americans and how we go into certain recovery settings and whether we feel welcome in those settings and whether, we get discriminated against even in self-help support groups as well as treatment environments. I think basically to give people a forum to talk about what it feels like to be Black and going through treatment, seeking help in general.
Great response. All right, there is another question in the Q&A from Allison Smith. Thank you, Allison, for this question. I'm in higher education working to expand access to collegiate recovery programs in Louisiana. I was just there, including our 6 HBCUs. I just lost that question, let's see. Oh, the question is like, do you know of any programs that provide specific services for African-American collegiate students?
At this moment, I do not. It's something that we are working towards. In Virginia, we've got amazing collegiate recovery programs, and some of them include, African American students. The programs that I'm most familiar with in Virginia that include the students, also the students have a difficult time. Some of them are first generation college students. Certainly, when there's people that don't look like them, don't respect the culture. And so one of the places that we're working on creating from the ground up, instead of taking a collegiate recovery program from a traditionally white school and kind of just plopping it on top, being able to build it from the ground up. And really take in consideration several of the things that Roland mentioned, but several of the things that were mentioned before, that you don't just overlay a women's program, a men's program on a women's program, even though we often do that. You certainly don't overlay or just plop, if you will, drop a traditional collegiate recovery program. I also think that that's a place where we can develop and recruit and mine, some of the future leaders and therapists of color that were mentioned before. If we start having some of these collegiate recovery programs at some of the HBCUs. There's our pot, there's our pool to be able to draw from.
That's a good
I'm
question.
really-
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, I'm really glad that question came before, and thank you, Jan, for that response, because there are collegiate recovery programs on the East Coast that, we kind of met when we were at the Big Texas rally in Houston. But one of the things that again, from an academic standpoint, at the College of Lake County, there's a host of students of color that's in the human services, addiction, and recovery programming. And they also have a Black history or some kind of group out there. I think that's the place to start. Like Jan was saying, is to introduce the ideas, because a lot of these students, they come from families that's been impacted by substance use disorder and mental health, or they themselves might be in recovery, but they haven't put a face or a voice to it. And I think just starting from that standpoint, on my end of the spectrum, would be very, very helpful. So I'm glad that question came up.
We also know that that in the country, there are some colleges, campuses that have like sober fraternities and sororities, people in recovery who are still partying, right?
Right.
Drug-free, recovery dormitories, right? So I could see how that could happen on HBCU campuses as well. We have a question that came in from Lucretia. Harm reduction versus abstinence in African-American programming. What are your thoughts about that?
I'll take it. I'll take a stab at it. Although I will preface that with saying that I have real strong feelings about this, and they're not always popular. I think harm reduction, I think there's a place for it. First of all, let me say that. I think that there's a place for harm reduction. I think there's no one size that fits all, clearly. I think, however, I'm suspicious about some of the efforts that have been pushed forward. I mean, pushed forward around the country about apparently the solution to the opiate epidemic is more opiates. And, I think that, we've had an opiate epidemic in the Black community for 60 years. And now, because it got into the suburbs, it's an opiate epidemic. And I think the drug companies would really want everybody on maintenance narcotics, on buprenorphine, Suboxone, Subutex. I think what happens in the Black community is that we didn't even they was putting us on methadone. They weren't even offering Black people Suboxone and Subutex. I think those are great drugs. I think, and that is a form of harm reduction, is medication-assisted treatment. I think those are great drugs for detox, and I think they're great drugs in some many cases, but I don't think they should be the first line of defense. I don't think that should be, and which it seems like it is, that the plan is to get everybody on Suboxone and Subutex so that they don't have to deal with cravings and urges. And I think it sends the message that abstinence-based treatment is outdated, it's obsolete, it's unfair, it's ineffective. And I don't agree with that, as a person who's been working in this industry for 35 years and has been in recovery myself for as long. I got to start working in this job when I had 6 months clean, so I do think harm reduction, like I said, to be fair, I was making a presentation once and I talked about my concern about them putting people on methadone, these really high amounts of methadone, and starting them with that and not letting them even try abstinence. And the lady came up to me and said, "Mr. Williams, I appreciate what you said, but I just want you to know methadone kept me alive long enough to get clean." And so I get it. There is no one size fits all. I like people to have the opportunity to try abstinence. And if it turns out that abstinence-based treatment doesn't work, then look at harm reduction, not the other way around. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. How about others? Your thoughts?
I have a very unpopular a piece around harm reduction because I think harm reduction is almost trickery as a means to trick people to stop using, right? But if we look, harm reduction has been here forever, right? Harm reduction is wearing a seatbelt. We're not trying to get people to stop driving. We're trying to reduce the harm that not wearing a seatbelt is going to do. Condoms are harm reduction. We're not trying to get people to not have sex. We're trying to get them to have safe sex and to reduce disease and things like that, right? More so in our field, BAC levels is a form of harm reduction. We're not trying to get people to stop drinking. We're trying to get them to drink safely so that the ensuing harm that comes along with it. So for some reason, we've decided to co-opt this word harm reduction and make it a strategy, if you will, a primary strategy to get people to stop using drugs or to stop drinking. And that to me is frankly wrong. If we want to look at kind of a parallel, if you will, of a pathway to recovery, that might be moderation, right? Somebody is participating in moderation type of recovery. But for whatever reason, I don't know who's making money on this whole harm reduction thing, but I think that we are doing ourselves a disservice. We're doing the people that we serve a disservice. If we're going to use a harm reduction strategy of a fentanyl test strip, why are we pushing somebody to stop using when in no other field are we trying to trick somebody into stop using? Help them use safely if that's what they're choosing to do, and to reduce the harm of death or whatever the case may be.
Doc, thank you for the response. Dr. Carl Hart's research says that 69% of people who have opioid overdose deaths have alcohol in their body at the time of death. So it just makes sense to me that we should talk to a lot of people that if you're going to continue to use opiates, that drinking while using opiates at the same time can be really deadly. How about others, your thoughts about this question?
Yeah, Mark. So I'm in a little hot water with some of my colleagues here in Lake County, but that's okay. I've been a rebel riser all my life, I would say. And like some of you all have already said, some parts of harm reduction I believe in. I really, respect that when we had like Roland said, we've been having an opiate epidemic for 60 something years. So when they started with the methadone maintenance, and introducing that, I get that. But there's something I always tell my harms reductionist colleagues that I believe in some aspects of it. And as an executive director of an RCO, there's some aspects that I don't believe in. I know that there's this big push about having a safe using house where people could go in and use drugs, and they have a whole staff there, so that if something happened, that piece I'm still, trying to incorporate that in my belief system. I don't believe that passing out, a safe using materials other than clean syringes is, something that I could grasp on. I too, Roland, came into recovery 30 something years ago, impacted by the cocaine, crack, and all of that stuff. I just don't think that harms reduction is passing out clean crack pipes and chewable and all of that stuff in communities of color is a good approach. So I'm still straddling the fence on that. And one of the things that I always tell my team, because some of them totally believe in it and some of them don't, that we just have to make sure that our motives are pure. I believe in the test strips, the Narcan and all of that stuff, but there, again, some aspect of it, I'm just having, it's a big pill to swallow. It really is, especially in our communities.
What are your thoughts here,
Listen,
Michael?
let me just say real quick, I've worked in Amsterdam for 3 years, which is their whole model was I helped start the first abstinence space treatment center in Holland. I've worked in Copenhagen. Both places have just what you're talking about. They have a huge harm reduction approach, and they give people the option. You can use. We'll make a safe place for you to use. We're a protected environment for you to use, and those places are horrible. I mean, you got a bunch of addicts congregating in the whole neighborhood that's protected, and you got junkies showing up, shooting up, and using. And I think if you're going to do that, and these places are not doing that, if you're going to do that, make treatment available on demand. If you're going to have places where you're going to say, we're going to support you using in a safe place, we assume you're going to use, so we're going to make it safe for you. And they're really not trying to put this, not so much about protecting the addict, it's about protecting society. I'd rather you be right here where we can see you rather than you be breaking in my house. I'd rather you be here at 7 o'clock in the morning than breaking in my house at 7 o'clock at night. And I think that I've seen those places where they have safe injection sites and they're administering people not only methadone, but heroin. And what it does is it sends a really mixed message that says that we think this is not okay, but we think it's okay, or you're just going to use it, so we're going to make it a safe place for you to use. But
Roland, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, listen, the panel, they all explained, it is a hard pill to swallow. I came into recovery absence-based, and I didn't know anything about harm reduction. It was like, there's a pathway, and so harm reduction reduce harm, and so that doesn't stop using. That does not stop the epidemic of drug use. So I understand the impact that it can make. But there's certain parts of harm reduction that doesn't make me feel comfortable that you still allow people to use based on the fact that there's a risk factor. There's always a risk factor when you use. So how I see harm reduction play out is that over time, we're going to have to recognize that harm reduction is just a long process of someone continually using and not being harmed by their use. Unlike people like myself that, like the panels, been in recovery for 33 years, I realized that my process was to understand if I keep using, I'm going to go back to using the way I always use. So whether you give me 10 millimeters of methadone or 60 millimeters or 100 millimeters, that in itself lets me know that, over a period of time, I'm still going to be looked at as a person that's using or in the process of addiction. My only current concern is that when we have more people understanding that absence-based is a true essence of recovery, and people say, well, like there's a philosophy, you're in recovery if you say you are, and so that philosophy holds true to the fact that if that's what recovery looks like, then that's great, but does recovery look like someone still on 100 milligrams of methadone and still having to associate themselves with the behaviors of addiction? It's a skewed message. And so I believe that the message of harm reduction is that over time, people are going to understand that you can't recognize people in a sense of understand their pathway if they're going to still be on a medicated assistant use. It doesn't make sense to me.
It sounds like then that that we need to continue to dialogue about harm reduction, study harm reduction, learn more about the best aspects of harm reduction. Alyssa, I think there was a question in chat about engagement. We had talked earlier about African Americans having, higher rates of non-completion, right? Engagement is of the utmost importance, right? What would you see as some of the keys to engaging African Americans in substance use disorders treatment, decreasing like non-completion rates?
Mark, if I may, I would like to, speak from the women of color perspective. Again, the many years of services to women, again, that was impacted by the cocaine crisis. One of the things that really, really helped to keep women engaged was, it's the old Project Safe model that we had here in Illinois, and maybe some other places across the time. They need transportation in order to get to the treatment center. They need, childcare on site because, one of the primary barriers to treatment is how am I going to get there? I don't have a bus card. I don't have Uber money. And then what am I going to do with my children? I don't have childcare. So I think, one of the biggest things, even today, as it was back in the 90s and the early 2000s, I think having transportation, childcare, and God forbid they don't have anything to eat, maybe even offering a lunch, especially if it's IOP. So I think that's a big, thing about retaining women. And then as far as men, being able to have, again, someone that's talking from the gender specific standpoint. A lot of times treatment for women and treatment for men is totally different. And so just making sure that the curriculum or the programming is speaking specifically to those individuals.
Yes, yes. And so you just responded, Mary, to engaging African-American women in substance use disorders treatment. I want to ask the panel then about, what do you see as the keys to engaging African-American men in substance use disorders treatment?
I'm doing a group right now in San Francisco, in Sacramento, that's an African-American men's group. And it's a paid group. It's not a self-help support group, it's a facilitated therapy group. And what I've discovered is that, and I've done many, many comparable things, but not just specific African-American men paying to come together to talk about issues that Black men come across. And what I'm discovering is just this amazing level of participation. When you get a bunch of brothers get in the room together and they take the barriers down, and we actually get to know each other and listen to each other. What's coming out and what's happening is just remarkable. We're really getting to hear people's story, and we think we know. A lot of times we think we know what's going on with people until you just shut up. And as the facilitator, I do a lot more listening than I do talking. And these brothers are talking, man. And so I'm of the mind that if you build it, they'll show. And I think with a lot of the brothers that came into the group were saying, man, I've always wanted something like this. I wanted a place like this. And there was no place for them to just come and talk about, issues specific to being a Black man in this country and trying to be in recovery at the same time, and trying to be a father, trying to be a partner, dealing with sexuality, dealing with violence, dealing with rage, all of that. So I think if there were more opportunities, I think people would participate.
Well, here's the question within your response. I've talked to African-American men who've gone through substance use disorders treatment. And they sometimes say that they believe if they really were to share with their counselor their anger, their rage, their trauma, that it would frighten the counselor.
Yeah.
What about that? What do counselors need to know about that?
I think if a client can't, and I think, I'm sure I'll let other people have comments about this, but a lot of that's how I started working on developing tools for clinicians to work with African Americans, because I watched that in a lot of the programs, the Black people were getting kicked out of programs quicker than anybody else. Black guy couldn't get angry because I had a therapist come to me and said, I want him discharged. I said, for what? Because he's threatening me. I said, what did he do? He raised his voice. And I said, well, he was angry so he can't get angry because his anger might trigger a reaction in a clinician or another peer that might make them feel unthreatened. The fact that they feel threatened doesn't mean he was threatening. And I don't think if they don't have an opportunity to express a full range of emotions in treatment, then they're never going to benefit from treatment.
And I used to work in a program years ago, Black and white clients. They had two TV rooms. The white clients would hang out in that room, the Black in that room. Sometimes the black in that particular room would play cards, and they play kind of loud, and staff would come up and say, are they about the riots? They know they just really are expressing themselves while they're playing a game of cards.
Yeah, it's culturally sensitive. It's culturally sensitive to the fact that, once again, understanding culture is important, especially in treatment. And we talked about earlier how we're exposing behaviors that are normal to us but abnormal to those that don't understand those behaviors. And so there needs to be a taught lesson on how to interact with different cultures and what those cultures exist. You know what I mean? So once again, that there has to be a learning tool that the clinicians have to understand that culture, whatever that culture is, and how to connect with them.
What are your thoughts about effective cross-cultural counseling? So much counseling is cross-cultural. Recommendations around effective cross-cultural counseling with African Americans as clients.
I guess I could count my response in that. You know what? I taught graduate multicultural counseling for incoming counseling students. And one of the books that we used was Daryl Wayne Sue's Counseling the Culturally Competent. And in his chapter on African Americans, I just love the information that he gives about, understanding just what Michael was talking about and Roland, the range of emotion with communication. Understanding that because someone elevate their tone doesn't mean that they're angry. And that book is really, really, significant in helping people to understand how to, counsel those individuals. So Daryl Wayne Sue, Asian, professor out of California that's been doing this work for many, many years. That textbook really give a lot of information on high tonality, body language, nonverbal cues, and things of that sort. That's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, and so the name of the authors of the book is like Sue and Sue, right? Daryl Wayne Sue and his brother, I think Daryl Sue.
Exactly.
Right. Right. How about others? What are your thoughts about that? The keys to effective cross-cultural counseling with African Americans as clients?
I really appreciate what both of, especially what Mary just said, because it's a very practical, right? It's a book that people can go get. For me, it's not enough. There's an expression that we often throw out is we don't know what we don't know, as though that's a final response and that's acceptable. If you don't know what you don't know, go find out. And so, again, for me, how dare somebody who has no idea and no willingness to learn about my culture attempt to engage me? They don't understand me. And so, the likelihood that they're going to be able to provide effective treatment for me is slim to none. And there are ways, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean, it's like engage with the many Black churches, African-American churches have recovery-based programs. And so partner with, go out and learn, for something that's specific that somebody can do. Go immerse yourself in the learning around. One of the things that I would love to see, we talk about food deserts. I believe that we have treatment deserts. I believe that we have recovery community organization and recovery support service deserts, and that in addition to the program that Roland has built, right? When you asked him that initial question, how about we put it in a Black community, so that it actually is a community-based program. It's something that grows out of the community, and that modalities that are used that are often considered extra, like good food, if this is a brain disorder or a brain illness, give our brain some good food rather than, giving us some of these medications that might prove more harmful down the road. But there are things that we can do that wouldn't require a heavy lift. What's wrong with putting a treatment center or a recovery community organization or focusing recovery support services in some of these communities?
I wrote a book many years ago with on the topic for clinicians on how to working with African Americans, relapse prevention for African Americans. And in that, there's a chapter that deals specifically with some 5 simple guidelines for clinicians working with African Americans, maybe even non-Black clinicians, because as we just talked about, there aren't that many not enough Black clinicians. And just the headline, I'll send this article, this excerpt to anybody who wants it, but it's the first one of 5 is self-assessment. So have people identify their own prejudices and limitations, like know what you bring to the table. The clinician needs to know, what are my prejudices? And this idea that I'm prejudice-free is not realistic. We all have prejudice. And so the trick is to know what your prejudices are and own them. The second one is to be careful about stereotyping and overgeneralization, because we tend to see people and we do all of it. People do that. We look at people, we see you dress a certain way, you carry a certain way, and people make assumptions about you. And that's real dangerous for people to do that with Black people. You know, people look at us and they see us in all different shades with all different styles and they make assumptions about who we are based on how we look. And that's very, very dangerous. And then the next one is the adaptation style and coping styles that was, that I learned from Peter Bell, who was my hero in this field. And he talked about how Black people can, acculturate into mainstream society, and how they adapt and whether they're, centered in in Black culture, centered in white culture, or kind of going back and forth. And that makes a big difference on how we deal with people. And the next one was, what is it, counseling or education? Because a lot of people, you try to learn about the Black client during the session. I'm learning about your culture instead of giving you therapy. When the session is over and I tell you, the therapist says, thank you, I learned a lot, then you know something's wrong with that. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is to, do your treatment based on the client's individual specific needs. Like which is a, treatment 101, base your treatment on what's going on with that client and be careful about joining into this pessimism. Don't, sometimes a client will work you. If you don't know how to work with a Black client, the Black client will work you and will come and show you, and you'll be sympathetic therapist who's not familiar with working with African-American client will start buying into a lot of the excuses and the reasons for why we ain't doing the work that we need to do. And the therapist is afraid to confront them because they don't want to come across as being racist or insensitive. So you got to be able to trust your skill set and have a rapport with the client. So that's just in a nutshell, those things that I've learned have been helpful.
Roland, people have put in chat that they would like a copy of the tool that you just described.
Okay. I will email it to you.
Okay, we can get it out to the group.
You could send it to everybody that says they want it.
Okay, great. Okay. So we are 2/3 through our time together. We have just 29 minutes left. So we want to see, make sure the participants are getting something out of this. Would you find your chat feature? What I'd like to invite you to put in chat is, from your perspective, those of you joining our webinar, what's the most important thing that has been discussed so far? What have you found helpful so far? Let's see what they put in chat. We want to make sure this is helpful. So are there any responses there, Ann or Jen or Alyssa?
There are. A broad discussion around harm reduction, conversation on harm reduction, historical trauma and holding space to serve. A lot of people, we are going to send out the reference that Roland talked about to everyone. So we'll just make sure if you're on the list, you'll get it. I found throughout years of combined therapy and experience on behalf of the panelists, it's helpful to hear their skepticism on harm reduction, specifically for those in the African-American community. The transparency of understanding the historical trauma of African-Americans. Also important to have culturally competent and cultural humility when receiving sobriety support. Listen and learn from the client. History and provide a safe space for them to express a full range of emotions. It's all been great, and I appreciate the discussion about working with African-American clients. It's critical. Hearing your thoughts on harm reduction. Having cultural awareness as part of the therapy, identifying and decreases barriers for treatment for African-American men, historical trauma, unresolved trauma.
Sounds like a range of benefits. Thank you for.
It does, yes.
Thank you for sharing. All right, so does anybody have any questions? You can put those in Q&A. Maybe there's a question or two that's in Q&A that we didn't get a chance to get to.
We don't have any at the moment.
Okay, so we'll check in periodically. So in the 1930s, Harry Anslinger had a war on drugs. And one of his wars on drugs was with African-American jazz musicians, but he found out that they wouldn't snitch. And if you arrested one of the African-American jazz musicians, other jazz musicians would bail them out. But they did have a war on drugs with singer Billie Holiday in the 1930s, right? After she sang the song Strange Fruit about African-Americans being lynched in the South. But what's interesting about that era was while they were having a war on drugs with Billie Holiday, she used heroin. That same Harry Anslinger, who was the director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, went to the studios and asked them to get treatment for Judy Garland. So he was treating Judy Garland from The Wizard of Oz, one of the greatest programs in history. He was treating Judy Garland as if she had an illness that needed to be treated in a hospital, and criminalized the substance use disorder of Billie Holiday. So often in history, that was just one example. The substance use disorders amongst African Americans has been criminalized. How do we turn that around? Your thoughts?
Cool. Well, I'll take a stab first in realizing that we need to change policies across the board in the criminal justice system. Really, continue. I mean, there's a lot of transparency when it comes to why we're being, the Black community is being singly directed at. And this comes back from the slavery years. And it's not really the fact that people don't know, they're educated to understand that the Black community has still been racially biased against over the years, and still today, as we alluded early, and Roland added, there's a lot of things that's happened over the last 2-3 years that is just, it's appalling to the Black community. So once again, we need to have people in places that can help change these laws and enforce the laws. Right now there's an issue with, me personally, with the legislature changing voting policies across the country for a reason. And our hands look like they're tied, but they're not, because people are not speaking out about it. So once again, we have to have the ability to make people aware of what's happening, how we can make change, and it has to start from the top. It has to start from the top, and it's not being done that way. So my concern is, when we get political injustice, and realizing that it's only because people are turning their heads, then we have a stronger fight than we should. And so I think we need to realize we need to vote people in the seats that are going to do something about this issue, and take people out of the seats that turn their heads. That's where it starts at.
Well, can you talk about RCOs and whether or not you think RCOs are important for Black communities, and if yes, how come?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Roland had mentioned how he's building treatment centers for Black communities with that aspect. RCOs, if people don't realize it, they're independent nonprofit organizations that represent the recovering community. Communities of color in particular don't have that opportunity to see what recovery looks like, more importantly. So these organizations promote recovery through, advocacy, public policy advocacy. They have different activities. They carry out recovery-based community education seminars, webinars. They provide training. They provide, of course, outreach programs, and essentially they provide recovery support services through peer-based. And so when me as a peer, a Black person, is leading a group of Black people, that is that is so strong in connecting people to where they're at. And so, the essence and sole mission of the RCO is really to mobilize resources within and outside of the recovery community to increase the prevalence of quality long-term recovery. We're not talking about just the episode after treatment. We're talking about the long-term recovery that will induce people to transform and help others transform. And so RCOs are really uniquely a one-stop shop. And so as a manager, I managed a recovery community center, right? And that was where, you know, we really had an opportunity to see people like myself, Black African-Americans, people that of color coming into a center and seeing Black people, you know, in a recovery process and understanding what it looked like. Until they came into that door, they did not know what recovery looked like. And so, you know, we had peers, you know, doing recovery coaching, peers on the phone, doing telephone recovery support to other people that was wanting support and doing trainings, peer-led facilitation. You know, recovery coaching is really a unique aspect of recovery support services that, you know, now we have coaches going into emergency departments. You know, we have coaches going into prisons and really inducing a seed of hope. And so when you have those type of organizations in Black communities, that's when Black recovery thrives. When you don't have that, it's very challenging for people of color to come out of their environment into a healing force. That healing force may be the faith-based community, it may be community leaders, but it's not a place where they can go and find that connection. So that's the value. I mean, that's some of the value, but there's more value than that.
I think one of the things I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about how come there's not enough African-American clinicians in this business. People brought up the fact that, you know, it's not, you don't make a lot of money off of it unless you're just a hustler, basically, to be honest, because this field just traditionally doesn't pay a lot of money. And you got to do a lot to get credentialed enough to get a job in this. So it's a lot of work for not a lot of, like Charlie C. used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze. But one of the things that I think, and this is just a shout out to my brother Mark here, is that I think it's really about attraction and not promotion. I think what happens is that, like for us, we're preaching to the choir right here, you know, we pretty much, you know, but I think when people see us doing what we're doing, when Black people see us doing what we're doing, young Black people going into recovery or thinking about going into some sort of helping profession, and they see what we're doing and the impact that we're having, I think that's what makes it attractive. That's what makes people say, you know what, I want to do what she's doing. I want to do what he's doing. And I think by putting ourselves out as much as we do, by letting people hear us and seeing the impact of the work we do. And that's why I think, Mark, you've been doing this for so many years, man, and people see you and it's attractive and you make it look good. You make it look like it's making a difference in the world. And I think you probably, like me and like probably everybody in this room, one of the things that gets people attracted to this, and just like the brother was just saying, coming in and seeing it, not hearing about it, coming in and seeing it in action is attractive to people and makes people want to be a part of it. And so that's being in, go ahead.
And thank you for what you just shared and the compliment, Roland, and you've been doing this at it for a long time as well. A couple thoughts here. One of them is the HBCUs, historically Black colleges. There have been efforts to like recruit members from those schools to join our professions, like we've seen that, right? And also in my lifetime, when I first became an alcohol and drug counselor 40 years ago, March 6th will be 40 years. I'll be a drug counselor for 40 years in March 6th, right? Most of my teachers were recovering non-degree, unlettered scholars, right? They knew what they were doing. But what has happened as the years have gone by is that the credentials, the academic credentials is increasing. So over the course, thank you, Thomasina, over the course of the last decade and a half, disproportionately, those getting master's degrees have been women who are white, the majority, right? So some organizations are coming up with creative strategies. Like they may have like African Americans on their team that have associates or bachelor's degrees, putting measures in place to support their education. The University of Illinois Chicago offers specialized scholarships for men of color working towards master's degrees in social work, and it's really successful. So things will happen. William White is predicting this, that more and more in our field, people in recovery from all ethnicities, Latino, Hispanic, white, African Americans, Asian, Native American, in recovery, will start to go back to school and advance their education. They will be double powerful, in recovery plus advanced education. That's one of the predictions of the future. It looks like we have 3 or 4 questions in chat. Either Jen or Alyssa, can you let us know what's in chat?
We do. The first question is, in your respective communities, what have you found to be some of the most effective methods of engaging folks in treatment?
I'll take a stab at it. So again, I'm here in Northern Lake County. And one of the affected measures engaging people is to, again, have those individuals with lived experiences. A lot of times I hear people come into treatment and you may have a master's level clinician that doesn't have any lived experience with, substance use recovery or mental health recovery. And a lot of the clients say, how can you tell me something when you're just taking it from the book? So I think that having people with lived experience has really, really worked here. I worked for many years with a primary behavioral health organization, and the majority of those individuals didn't look like me, but a majority of the clients that came in looked like me. So I would just kind of take it to leadership as we need to start hiring individuals that, look like the clients that we're serving. So that's what we're doing in our community. And along the lines of RCO, if I may, Mark, just for a moment, one of the reasons that I founded the Northern Illinois Recovery Community Organizations, because we are in a community with big box organizations like the Gate, well, maybe I shouldn't say their names, but all of these huge treatment providers. And they provide the treatment for people that look like me or look like us, but then those individuals go right back into their communities and they don't have the recovery support. Worked a lot in the drug courts and the veterans courts, same thing. The prosecutor, the public defender, judge didn't look like me, but the individuals that was part of that problem solving court did. So again, pushing the notion that it's important that we have individuals that could really make that connection with the clients that have that lived experience. For many, many years, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna be quiet, I would never talk about my personal recovery in the environment that I worked in. And the reason I never talked about my personal recovery, because I heard that stigmatizing language that was being used. And that stigmatizing language, didn't make me feel good as a person in recovery that was in upper leadership. And I'm like, no, I'm never gonna do that. But it wasn't until Faces and Voices got to me and started talking about, no, you need to put a face and a voice to your recovery so people could see that there is hope. And when I began to do it, I was nervous, Jan. I got to tell you, as an African-American woman and an environment of predominantly white male and master's level females from the suburban area, I was really nervous, but I took the chance to do it. And I am so glad I did, because now people are coming into our RCO and saying, Dr. Mary, you really give me some hope. So I don't know if I kind of diverted from the question, but I just wanted to add that piece up.
No,
Let me add one thing real quick. I'm sorry. Let me just say this real quick because I forget stuff. So I think that also, in addition to what Mary said, is that, it's not the messenger, it's the message. And one of the reasons why a lot of people don't come into this field, African-American clinicians don't come into the field because they're not in recovery. And they're afraid that if they come into this business, that they're not going to have any credibility because they don't have that lived experience. And I've learned over the years where I've hired nothing but people in recovery. Just because you're in recovery don't mean that you're going to be a good clinician. Just because you're Black don't mean you're going to connect with Black people. And I think that a lot of people, the odds against an addict, a person with a substance use disorder, the odds against them being successful in their efforts at recovery are small. Most people actually fail. And so we do the clients in some ways a disservice by perpetuating this message that you got to be one to help one, that you got to be an addict to help an addict, that you have to have the shared experience. And the shared experience is that people know what it feels like to do something that ain't good for them. The shared experience, and it may not be drugs and alcohol. It may be some other area of your life where you've made the same decision over and over again, look in the mirror and say, damn, I can't believe I did that. when we send this message that says you got to be an addict to be effective, that you can't get it from the books, you actually can. People do get from the, in my opinion, people do get education, and they add the education with some compassion and some desire. They can be effective, even though they've never been arrested, never had a tattoo, never smoked crack, never been to, you know. So I think that there's a balance between having the recognizing what the shared experience might be, and the shared experience doesn't have to be an experience in as a person with a substance use disorder. That's my 2 cents on that. You're
Thanks,
muted,
Roland.
Mark. There you go.
Yeah, you're muted.
Thomasina put in chat that everybody might be recovering from something. You know, there was a
That's right.
professor from Pepperdine University who asked her students first day of class, how many are in recovery? Half of the hands went up. How many of you have an addiction? Half the hands went up. She said, well, the rest of you all have about 2 days to find out, you know, what yours is. She kind of believed that it's hard to like get through, live in our country, the stress connected to living in our country without overdoing something sometimes. And whether it's chemical or not, she believed that if people were in touch with that, that would increase their empathy.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, I just wanted to add, you know, Dr. Mary had mentioned how we need to.
Somebody else might be talking in the background. So someone may need to be muted.
And
Somebody might need to be muted. I think they are muted. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think, you know, Dr. Mary had alluded to in Roland the message, you know, I come from a 12-step background, and certainly when I started advocating back in the early 90s, it was like, you know, people kind of looked at me kind of crooked-eyed, and you know, but I felt the need to go outside of the 12-step fellowship because nobody, other than that, how do people know what recovery looks like if they're not going to a 12-step meeting? And so I, you know, as an advocate, you know, one of the key points of my advocacy was putting a face and voice to recovery. That was the essence of advocacy, and that's how we put videos out, showing people what recovery looks like, going to the state capitol and advocating, and you know, one of the things that still holds true is that, you know, we can promote recovery, but it's an attraction. And so the attraction is like it's been shared, even especially when I was managing the Recovery Community Center, people were attracted to the fact that we would have these big social events, recovery events, and people would come and say, wow, recovery, this dispels the myth that recovery would be bored. I'm so excited about wanting to be in recovery that I'm going to come back tomorrow and start this. You know, so the excitement of recovery was that people started saying, wow, this is the life I always wanted. I just didn't know how to go about getting it. And so that really showed a real presence in saying, you know, if you want recovery and you want to, you know, like I would call my wife in the middle of the night, like 9 o'clock, saying, babe, I'm gonna be a little late. Somebody wants recovery. I got to bring them to, you know, a treatment center. That's the heart of knowing that, you know, because they saw recovery, they wanted it. You know, if they didn't see recovery, that could have been another option. But they saw recovery and they said, you know what, I want to give it a try. Will you help me? And I will never say no.
Well, another question that's in Q&A.
Yes. We have somebody wondering, what are your recommendations for counselor self-care to prevent burnout, and what are some resources?
Yeah, because that's an important question, and because I was going to ask you all, you know, collectively, panelists, you probably have over 130 years of experience. How do you care for yourself to continue to do this work?
I'll start with some of my strategies, and I think the first one is I think of self-kindness before I think of self-care. I think that this notion of self-care is wonderful, but being able to be kind to myself. So every week I decide, what am I going to do that is a practice of self-kindness. I think about self-compassion. You know, that those are the strategies that I need to be able to take one more step. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I remember going to a mutual support group and saying, I feel weary. And for me, you know, I know the answer to weariness, but I needed to say it out loud. I needed to see the connection of people's heads nodding. And then I needed to go do something with that weariness, and was able to do so. But to offer myself some grace, right? And that's for me where the kindness and compassion come in. That I cannot extend grace to somebody else if I'm not able to extend grace to myself. So
kind of like calling in well. Hello, boss, it's me. I'm feeling real good. I'm calling in well. I'm taking care of myself today. How about others? Your secret to longevity, how you deal with burnout and compassion fatigue.
I play
I'll
golf.
go.
Go ahead, Dr.
Okay.
Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Jan, thank you. I like that self-kindness. I had to write that down and put that in my bag. But yeah, just making sure that I step away from the desk. And the desk could be, especially with Zoom and all of those things, step away and take my lunch break. You know, one of the things that I hear a lot of individuals talk about is stop taking your lunch break at the desk while you're working and you're eating, and it's really not a lunch break. So incorporating that into my bag of tricks has been really, really helpful. And then the other thing that I have been doing for many, many years is going on a vacation, and a vacation being somewhere that I haven't been before. You know, not those same places where the family is and you got to do a cookout, going somewhere that's going to give me joy, you know, someplace in nature where I could breathe in some fresh air. And I think that that's really key to self-kindness and self-care. I like that.
I play golf as many times as I can, which I love. I used to wonder how those people find all this time to play golf until I started playing golf. And then I figured it out. So I play golf all over the place. I meditate 30 minutes every day. I pray every day, all the time. You know, I have a group of people in my life, mostly men, but I have a group of people in my life that I'm willing to share the good, the bad, and the ugly with. I got brothers that we get together, we do stuff, we hang out, we're on the phone talking to each other, and we're there for each other. And I've got that kind of support network that's been incredible. And I'm careful about what I put in my body, you know, because I didn't want to get clean and sober and eat myself to death. You know, so I'm careful of what I put in my body. I adhere to all my medical issues, take medications as prescribed. And like Dr. Mary, I travel, man. I go everywhere. I'm going to Europe in a couple of weeks for 2 weeks and just hang out with my people over there. I got people over there. And, you know, I worked hard. So I do what I have fun. I try to have fun. They say, you know, if you don't figure out how to have fun in recovery, you ain't gonna stay in recovery. So I figured out how to have fun in recovery. You know, I give myself the things that I like. I've been married 31 years. You know, I got 3 grown kids and grandkids, and I recognize the value of relationships and connections. And I breathe into those relationships. I feed those relationships. And it just, the result of that is that I feel fulfilled, which is something I never felt and never thought I could feel. So those are things that I do. And I agree, if you don't figure out how to take care of yourself in this business will eat you alive. It will eat you up, and your job is not going to take care of you. I teach this to students all the time. Listen, you need to know that your job is not going to take care of you. Your recovery is your responsibility. Your self-care is your responsibility.
Hey, Roland, when you want to play some golf, you know, just come over to Myrtle Beach and let me know. We got.
Are you in Myrtle Beach?
I sure am, my brother.
Oh man, we're gonna change numbers then. I've always wanted to golf in Myrtle Beach. You got it.
I'll send you. I'll send it in the chat.
Okay.
And, you know,
sure.
my life is like Roland. You know, I just watch what I eat. I drink water. I proper schedule of sleeping. You know, I take time to pray, meditate. I'm really enjoying life. That's why I retired. And I think one of the things was that, you know, before I got to a point where I just was so conscious of everything, now it's like, you know, when I get up and I have my strongest question is, what am I going to cook for breakfast this morning? That's it. Everything else is just, you know, it's peachy keen. So I think self-care is really important, especially when you know that, you know, you take stuff home with you, you don't know how to leave it alone. I cut my phone off for hours at a time. You know, I need that time for myself, and I make some me time, my family time. Me and my wife, we have Tuesday and Thursday nights is our nights, the movie night, or we go out to eat night. You know, I just like Roland, I just want to enjoy life. You know, we're going on vacation. I'm going to Bahamas in 2 weeks. I'm going down to Jamaica in May. You know, I told my wife I want to go to Italy this year, and I'm going to make things happen, and that's what
You all
life
were
is all
saying
about.
that this field doesn't pay well, but it seems like it can, based upon the places you travel. You know, I feel like.
And
with Mike
Mark,
and
let me
Bill,
say, this is my other self-care right here.
There it is.
This is my guy right here. I got a little one down on the floor. I can't pick both of them up at the same time, but
Yeah.
these guys also bring a lot of love into your life. Say
Amen.
bye.
Are we going to ask quickly for the participants to put in chat the action you're going to take as a result of this presentation? What's the one action you're going to take? What I was going to say is I feel like I've cheated death through my clients. And I know that's true for many of us, because when your clients go on to like live lives of recovery that can impact recovery in their family across generations, it basically means that your great work, thank you, Keisha, will never, ever end. So what do you see there in chat? What's the action people are going to take there, Ann? And I'm going to turn this back over to you.
It says, many thanks for all of the insight gained and cues learned. That will be useful moving forward. Lots of thank yous. I will reach out to AMC Church in my area. I'm going to add more of this information to my classes with my MSW students. Continue to move forward to have more of us within representation. It can be intimidating even going into the field where there's not much representation. Checking the website and listening to the podcast. Education, awareness, and empathy. Thank you for sharing so much knowledge. Thank you so much.
I want to thank the panelists. You made my day. And I know you shared a lot of helpful information. What a great day. So Ann, I turn it over to you.
Mark, did you get that email?
Yes, I'm going to send it. I'm going to send it out to make sure everybody gets a copy of it. Thank you, Roland.
Great. Thank you, everyone. The webinar has been recorded and we will be posting it on the ATTC website. It'll probably take us about a week to 10 days. So we can have the transcript ready to go at the same time. And again, if you have any other questions, let us know. Lots and lots of thank yous. This was a great presentation. So thank you to all of our panelists, to Mark for pulling this all together, and for all of you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey, Dora. Thank you, everybody.
Guys,
Hey,
Thank
Roland,
you.
I put that number in chat for you,
I'm
Roland.
getting ready to text you right now.
And guys,
everybody.
hey, Jan and Mary, God bless you. Thanks for being part of this great conversation. And to the people that are listening, we had a great opportunity to get some real feedback from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
It was
Jan,
nice
I'll see
meeting you
you on the
guys.
women's roundtable, the global roundtable. I'll see you on that.
I'm looking forward to it. Michael, it was wonderful to see you. I aspire to play golf and do some of the things that you all have talked about. So thank you.
Thank you, Jan. It's good to see
Thank
you.
you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity, and Mike, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mary. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you guys. See you. Have a great day.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, be well,
Yeah.
be safe.